Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are about to start.
Yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for all of you? The workshop is about to start. So, first of all, good morning here in Europe and good afternoon in China. Please let me welcome you on behalf of the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and also in the name of our co-organizer, the China-CEE Institute. My name is Viktor Eszterhai. I'm a senior research fellow at the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and I'm going to be the host of today's workshop. So today's workshop is the latest in a series of events aimed to ensuring a dialogue between European and Chinese researchers on the key issues that affect our relations. So this year, we've decided with our co-organizers to focus on economy. And today's workshop is the second in line in this year. The first one focused on the dual circulation and its impact on the EU-China relations. And today's event is entitled The Impact of Global Value Chain Development Trends on the World Economy and on China-EU Relations. So the workshop is divided into two major panels with distinguished European and Chinese colleagues, and they are going to share their views on this topic. But before we get into the discussion, however, I first would like to welcome the heads of the two organizing institutions to give their welcome speeches. So first, I would like to ask Ambassador Martin Schroeber, who is the director at the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Trade, to deliver his opening speech. So, Ambassador Schroeber, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Victor. Dear Director Fong, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, good morning and good afternoon. First of all, let me also welcome you in the name of our institute, the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade, at this workshop today. I'm thrilled that this event could take place today, and I would like to hereby thank this opportunity for our co-organizer, the Institute of European Studies of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and especially Director Fong and his team. I am happy to see, at least online, so many familiar faces and friends within the audience, within the participants. Special welcome to all scholars and participants from the People's Republic of China and from our fellow European countries. This workshop today is an important event for us, and not only because of one, but also because of four reasons. As Victor already mentioned, this event is a part of a series. In the recent years, we could organize a workshop annually, but in this year, it is already twice a year. This is indeed a success, and it's a remarkable sign of the great cooperation that our institute has with the China-CEE Institute. As a think tank closely related to the Hungarian Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Trade, it is among our goals to contribute to the Eastern opening policy of the Hungarian government. Therefore, it is inevitable for us to collect as many information as possible about the People's Republic of China, and especially when it comes from the first hand, and how our European partners see this country. This workshop is a great tool of helping us to reach this goal. Well, European and Chinese relations have been facing multiple challenges in the recent years. The COVID-19 pandemic or the Russian aggression in Ukraine, just to name two. We believe in the importance in communication. Moreover, we believe that communication might be even more important when tensions are recognizable. Because understanding is a key factor in international politics, and the best way to understand each other is the intensified communication. This workshop has a significant importance in this regard as well, and what's more, the themes we are going to touch today have not only academic but practical importance as well. It is of our utmost importance for both sides, Europe and China, to identify global value chain development trends, since value chains are in the middle of the heart of bilateral and multilateral trade relations. It is true also in times of war that Europe is facing nowadays, with the hope that we could be able to return to peaceful times as soon as possible. The COVID pandemic also affected negatively the intensity of scientific cooperation. This conference is a good sign that despite this challenge, at least in online format, we are able to maintain our cooperation. Taking all these into consideration, I cannot overestimate the importance of such an event. And a personal remark, if I may. I had the opportunity to represent our institute in Beijing back in 2015 when the China-CEE One Belt, One Road think tank cooperation was established. It was during my first directorial term. And later on, as a Deputy State Secretary responsible for cultural diplomacy at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Trade, I had the honor to work on the Hungarian Cultural Year in China in 2019. With these personal memories, it might be understandable that our cooperation has a significant personal importance to me as well. Concluding my remarks, my welcoming remarks, I only like to wish a successful event with great conversations for all the participants. I do hope that we'll be able to meet personally soon as well. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Schober. Thank you for these kind and important thoughts. Secondly, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Chongping Feng, who is the director of the Institute of European Studies and also the president of the China-CEE Institute. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair. Good morning to our European colleagues. I really enjoyed having the opportunity to participate in this seminar. I want to first of all to say thank you to Director Martin, for your very warm remarks. Our institute has always valued partnership we have enjoyed between our two institutes. I agree. This is a very important event. The theme of this seminar is a very good one. You mentioned the international trade. You mentioned the big powers relations. You say Ukraine process. I would also like to take this opportunity to say a few words about Europe. What we think about what's going on in Europe, and also I will come back to China-European relations. There are a lot of discussions in China, in Beijing, about Europe. The obvious one is, the impact of the Ukraine crisis. It has been for many months, but what this is going to look like eventually? What is the impact? We have talked about the security impact. In Europe, people are talking about the war has returned to Europe, which means, you have no war for more than 70 years. Suddenly, what is the remarks made by French president? War comes out from the textbook. My own view is it's not just the war comes back to Europe. It's going to be some kind of Cold War, new Cold War between Europe and European and Russia. The hot war is in Ukraine, but the relations between Russia and the rest of European countries, I'm afraid, it's going to be a very difficult. And this conflict, we cannot predict, for how many years. It's going to last for a long time, and not just about the time. Intensifying of this war conflict is also another worry. People everywhere is talking about the possibility of a nuclear using nuclear by Russia. American president and also other European leaders have already expressed concerns. it's not just the security impact. Economic impact is same, it's also huge. We have been talking about the sovereignty debt crisis in Europe. Then it's a refugee crisis. Then COVID-19 pandemic. And now it's energy crisis. This is not just because of the war, also because of anti-sections and the sections imposed by both sides. Russia and European countries, European Union countries, and others. So this energy crisis will spill over to other areas. Politically, economically, Europe is in a very unstable situation. Populism, extreme right wings are coming back again. Not shortly. It was a very important feature a couple years ago. Now it comes back. We saw this recent election in Italy, and other countries, Sweden. This is clear evidence for this political challenges facing in Europe. All these extremely forces are opposed to further integration in Europe. The German chancellor was talking about enlargement and decision-making, trade reforms for decision-making, but the reality is these are going to be very difficult. To have more countries, more members to make a meaningful, real deepening of integration. I can understand. Some leaders are rather think we need more Europe, but this is precisely the challenges for Europe. It's very difficult to have more Europe because any one member country states can veto this, and the political environment is no longer anymore favoring more Europe. So all what I want to say is, Europe is facing a number of challenges. And come back to the China-European relations. Director Martin mentioned, the relations between us. My feeling is we are, witnessing a difficult situation. We do not need to, hide that fact. We need to have more communications like this morning. I agree with you. We need to have more. We expect more, quick to have a face-to-face meetings, and not just through the videos. And communication becomes very difficult since the pandemic, and this increased misunderstandings and a lot of challenges facing us. So I agree with Director Martin. Our two institutes, other European colleagues, Chinese colleagues, we need to work hard to strengthen the communications, to reduce the misunderstandings, and because the world need to have effective, strong China-European relations. China and Europe are two of the three biggest economies in the world. A stable China-European relations means a lot for a stable world economy and development. thank you for your coming to this joint seminar. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Fong. Thank you for your kind words, but also for your deep thoughts. I think that we will touch these topics and especially challenges you named during your welcoming speech. And I think this will also provide good insights for the escalation and also for facilitating the discussions we will have today. So before we start the discussion and jumping to the panels, I would like to ask all the participants for one technical point. We would like to ask all of you to turn your camera for a moment, of course, if you can. And this will be very important for us to make a group photo. So again, I would like to ask all of you to switch on the camera for a moment. And thank you very much in order to make a group photo.
到我这儿来，关键这冯走的，
哎，其他人走没？其他人走没？
那个全景，
这是自动式的。
哎，别到我这儿。
有你说话了。
对。
So please, if you can turn on the camera.
哎，咱们这个就只能对一个人了，自动的。
对，都不讲话的时候，他就展开了。
哦，对。
冯总，你赶紧说两句。
我们现在不说话了。 看看会不会集中到我们这3个人都来一下。哎
Okay, thank you. I have to say cheese. Okay, sorry, I have to cheese to all of you. So please, cheese. You can smile. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I think nothing left to do but to hand over to the moderator to the first panel. So I would like to give the opportunity to Dr. Yan-Hong Sun, who is a senior researcher at the Institute of European Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. So I would like to give the floor to Dr. Sun. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues in Europe, and good afternoon, colleagues in China. I'm Su Yan-Hong from the Institute of European Studies, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. My great pleasure to be invited to attend this very meaningful conference. We all noticed that since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been a lot of discussions within the developed countries about adjusting the industrial supply chains to ensure security. The logic of security is taking place, the logic of economic efficiency to become the priority of some governments and some multinational companies. In this context, the global value chain has entered a new stage of restructuring characterized by trends towards more localization, more regionalization, and more diversification. And this process is mainly driven not by cost-effective calculations, but more by geopolitical or values considerations. So it is also closely related with some new legislations from some important economic actors in the global market. So this topic actually refers to several perspectives, such as economics, geopolitics, and also laws. So in this panel, we have 4 experts focusing on different research fields. We believe that their insights, their speeches can complement each other and help us understand better the topic comprehensively. Yeah, we have an hour, and the last part saved 10 minutes for us. So we have about 1 hour and 15 minutes for this panel, and each speaker has 15 minutes to present your analysis and opinions, and then we have about 15 or 20 minutes for Q&A and discussion. So our first speaker is Professor Fabrizio Zucca. Professor Zucca is from the Research Center for Regional Economics, Transport and Tourism of Bocconi University. He's also the founder and president of his own company, Strategia e Sviluppo Consultants. And he's also member of a scientific committee of Eurospace, which is a prestigious Italian think tank. Actually, Eurospace has been an important Italian cooperation partner of our institute for several years. And we had a lot of cooperation with the Eurospace, and the president, Professor Fada, and the general secretary, Professor Marco Licelli, are always very supportive for our cooperation. So I'm so happy to introduce Professor Zucca today. I believe that based on his very rich experience, Professor Zucca will give us an inspiring speech on this topic. So the floor is yours, Professor Zucca. Is Professor Zucca online? Professor Fabrizio Zucca.
I cannot see either. I cannot see him either.
Huh? Oh, so he's not online. Maybe we can start from the second speaker. Maybe later, Professor Zucca will.
I tried to call him.
Will log in. Okay, so let's start from our second speaker, Professor Ding Yibing. Professor Ding Yibing, Ding is the president of School of Economics of Jilin University. And he's also the member of Council of Chinese Society for European Economic Studies. And his topic today is the reconstruction of global value chains and its impact on China-EU export trade. So please, Professor Ding Yibing, the floor is yours.
Okay, it's beyond my expectation. I expect the second one. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dr. Sun, and thanks a lot for the organizer of this seminar to provide this very valuable opportunity for us to share and discuss our recent researches on the topic of this China-European trade and global value chains. Let me share my slides. So, okay. So can you see that?
Yes,
right.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Today my topic is the reconstruction of global value chains and its impact on China's export to EU. Firstly, I will talk about some background and the motivation of our study. We know that the global economy faces with multiple uncertainties in recent years, which include both the uncertainties and the risks on the long-term economic growth, and also the other uncertainties like the short-term policy uncertainties, like some public events shocks, like some geopolitical shocks, etc. And these multiple uncertainties on global economy, they interact with each other, and they have quite complicated effects on the so-called global value chains and the whole global specialization pattern based on this global value chain specialization. I think under this multiple uncertainties, the trade between China and European countries also show some changes in recent years. And for all these multiple uncertainties, I think that trade frictions between China and the US, I think which begin around 2017, which directly affect the trade between China and Europe. And we can see later that this impact of trade frictions between China and the US may have some positive effects on the trade between China and the European countries. But anyway, all these multiple uncertainties caused so-called reconstruction or a trend of reconstruction of global value chains, which caused some, transfer of production between countries, which also caused some discussion and some expectation of the decoupling of some countries, like between China and the US. And this reconstruction, or this expectation of reconstruction, also make some effects or impact on China's trade with European countries. This are the global background of the topic we're talking about. And on the other side, from a Chinese perspective, we can see firstly, China has made many efforts to maintain and even develop its trade cooperation with Europe in recent years. And although there's trade frictions between China and US, but China has still and maybe made more efforts to develop its trade and also financial cooperation with Europe. And on the other side, on the domestic level, China also has made many efforts in recent years to upgrade its industrial structure, to make some structural change to achieve the so-called high quality development target. Okay, it's not only focused on the growth rate, but also we want to make our industry more technology intensive and with higher domestic value added and so on. So China's trade efforts with European countries are driven by both its desiration to maintain its trade cooperation with Europe and to utilize this trade relations to promote the domestic upgrading of its industrial structure. And so for our research, we want to see, firstly, we want to check the changes of China's cooperation with Europe in this so-called global value chain specialization and changes in the trade commodity structure of China's export to Europe in recent years. The first one, the changes of China's cooperation with European GVC specialization. We can see the Sino-European cooperation in this global value chain field. What are the changes, the movement of this fields cooperation. And the second one, the trade commodity structure of China's export to Europe. I think that is directly relevant with China's target to improve its own industrial structure to promote its own so-called high quality growth or high quality development. And then we want to make empirical study on the relations between these two. It is to say, we want to identify the impact of China's cooperation with European GVC specialization on the commodity structure of China's export to Europe. We want to see that the deeper the China has a cooperative relation with European in GVC specialization, can or will not promote the upgrading of commodity structure of China's export to Europe. Okay, so GVC, we all know what is GVC, so we need not to provide more explanation here. And we can see this figures are quoted from the GVC yearly reports by Wang Zhi and others. And we can see that both China and Europe play very important role in this global value chain structure. But normally in previous years, within this global value chain structure, China has a deeper and closer relations with the US compared with its relations with European countries, including Germany. Okay, but is this trend changed in recent years? That is what we want to check in this research. Okay, we use index, we call it China-EU or China-Europe Cooperation Index on GVC specialization. It's necessary to notice this year we include the UK in our samples, so it's totally 28 countries, because in most time for our sample period, the UK is a member of EU, because our samples including the data from 2007 to 2020. So we include UK into our EU samples. Okay, for this index, we call this 2Com. In this index, which C and J represent China and its EU trade partner respectively, and I for I industry. So this ECI means the total export of China's I industry to European countries, to EU countries, and EJI means the total export of J country in EU in its I industry. Okay, total export. And IVCJI means the value added that China, the value added in I industry that China export to J country in EU, and then used by J country to produce final products and re-export by J country in EU. which means this this ratio that AV to ECI plus EGI means the dependence of European J country on China's export of intermediates, and FV means and FV CGI means that the value added of China's China's I industry that come from J country in EU. Means the I industries value added in China that come from J country of EU. So the later ratio means that the dependence of China's I industry on the intermediates come from European countries. So combine these two together, we get a ratio that can reflect the interdependence of China and European countries in this GVC specialization. So we name it as a cooperation index. And we also use the ratio of China's I industries exported value added to J country in European Union to China's total exported value added in I industry as a ratio to show China's commodity structure of its export to EU. So we can get these two indices, and these two indices we know that are all on the country pair industry level. So we totally have 14 manufacturing industries for this calculation, and we have 28 country pair between China and one specific European countries. And we use the average level of this country pair industry level data to make a whole index of China-EU cooperation index and China's export commodity structure to European Union as this orange line and this blue line. This blue line represents the China-EU cooperation index in GVC specialization. And we can see that after all we can say begin with 2017, this cooperation index has a trend of increasing both 2017, 2018, 19, and 2020. Okay, we can see a relatively significant trend of growth in recent years. And for the China's export trade commodity, and in fact, it's the share of its intermediate export to European countries. We can see except a sharp decline in 2018. In other years, the change trend is also increasing. And for the change of the year 2018, we can see it as a result of that year's the dramatic increasing of the trade friction between China and the US and its impact on the whole China's export to other countries. So we can see that firstly, we have a increase in recent years of China-EU Cooperation Index, and secondly, except this special year, we can see some common movement of this cooperation index and the China's export commodity structure. Okay, then we can see this scatter diagram. This scatter diagram, we just show the original country pair industry level data for this relations between the cooperation index and the export commodity structure, which x-axis represents the cooperation cooperation index, and the y-index show the export commodity structure, and we got this simulation line, which also still show a positive relations. But anyway, we need to use a more formal methodology to prove our the impression. So we use the panel data model to make a formal empirical study, which dependent variable is the China's export commodity structure to European countries, and the key explanatory variable is the China-EU cooperation index, and we also have some control variables, including R&D and capital intensity, wage rate, FDI, etc. And also we control the country industry fixed effect. Okay, we can see we use the trade data between China and the EU 27 plus UK, which make 28 country pairs. We use the data from 14 manufacturing industries. We use data from 2007 to 2020. We use the trade data from the ADB Emerald database and the UIB GVC indicators, which itself based on the WILD database. Okay, and we can see this basic descriptive statistics, and then the result of the baseline model. We can see that either for the basic dependent variable, or we divided basic dependent variable to two parts, the result are all significantly positive, and that means basically this increase of the cooperation or the interdependence in GVC specialization between China and the European countries improve or promote the export of the intermediate goods export by China to European countries, thus be helpful for China's own targets of the industrial upgrading, because we know that compared with the final final goods production, the intermediate good production, which normally has a more intensive technology intensity and which are more capital intensive and less labor intensive. Okay, that's in accordance with China's policy target, and we can also see we utilize the one period lag value of the explanatory variable as a instrument variable to deal with the possible endogeneity problem, and we also get the same results. And if we change the method of calculation of our dependent variable to check the robustness of the results, which also has same result. And then if we utilize another method, not the panel data regression, we use panel topics regression, we also get the same result. That show our results are I think quite stable, quite robust. Okay, and we can see this heterogeneity check. We divide all these industries to two categories, which are high technology manufacturing industries and low technology manufacturing industries based on the OECD criteria. And we can see this improvement of cooperation index had both positive effects on both high-tech and low-tech industries. But if we see the result of this interaction term between high technology industry and the cooperation index, we can see this positive, significantly positive result. That means compared with low-tech industries, this improving impact are more significant in the high technology manufacturing industries. So it also shows it's quite helpful for this industry upgrading target. And we also see, also check the possible mechanism of this impact. We want to see through which channel this cooperation, the improvement of cooperation index can promote the increase of share of intermediate goods of China's export to European countries. We can see that it mainly through the reduction of labor cost and the promotion of technology growth, these two channels. So that are our results of our empirical studies. So we can see that faced with all those uncertainties, China promotes its economic and financial cooperation with other countries, especially Europe. And the cooperation index in GVC specializations between China and Europe grew in recent years. And the cooperation in GVC specialization between China and Europe has a positive impact on the commodity structure of China's export to Europe, thus be helpful for China's efforts on structural improvement for its manufacturing sector. Thus, China has motivation to improve its cooperation with Europe, with EU in GVC specialization. So we know that China join and try to join some regional or mega regional cooperative mechanisms, but besides this RCEP or CPTPP mechanism, China is still want to promote its economic and trade cooperation with European countries, at least from its own Chinese perspective, to get a higher quality development. Okay, so and I think that we may have some new perspective of Sino-European cooperation, not only in manufacturing sector, but also in maybe monetary and financial field, or maybe on the utilizing of resources. Okay, thank you very much. That's our basic results.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ding. Thank you for your very comprehensive and very clear presentation on your research on China-EU cooperation on GVC, and you give us a very promising conclusion that China has been promoting the cooperation with the EU in the global value chain, and this cooperation is mutual benefit for both China and the EU, and in the future, currently and in the future, China has a strong motivation to strengthen this cooperation with the EU. So I think you give us a very good start for our panel. And now I was informed that Professor Zucca is in our meeting room now. Hi, hello, Professor Fabrizio Zucca.
Professor Zucca, you didn't open your microphone.
Oh.
Okay. Yes.
Good afternoon. Good morning, Professor Zucca.
Good morning to you, and good afternoon for those in China.
Yeah, I have already introduced you at the beginning of this panel, and you weren't in the meeting room at that time. And I like to repeat some parts of my introduction about you, because you are the member of the scientific committee of Eurospace. And Eurospace is an important partner of our institute for many years, and we had a lot of successful cooperations with Eurospace, and the president, Professor Fala, and the general secretary, Professor Marco Licelli, are always very supportive for our cooperation. So I'd like to send our warm greetings to you and to the Eurospace colleagues.
So thank
and then let's welcome Professor Zucca to present to make his speech for us. You have 15 minutes, Professor Zucca. The floor is yours, please.
I think I will be even shorter, because the reason why I'm here, I'm late, because we have a big event here in Eurospace in Sardinia, and we are hosting a delegation from Southeast Asia on the labor market. So I am traveling, and I just took some part of my time to take part to your important delegation at your important conference. So what I would like to discuss is a topic which I think is becoming more and more important in Europe, and is mostly related to the sustainability. Probably I also head of the sustainability laboratory in Eurospace. And why discuss about sustainability? Because there is a number of new regulation that EU is actually approving that will affect in a very strong way all international flow. As you know, probably there is this discussion about sustainability and about how company should meet ESG governance, where ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance standards. So in the European Union, there was an old regulation that was issued in 2016 that obliged company to report on their sustainability standards. But that regulation at the time, it was probably too early, did not provide for any kind of KPI or metrics to measure how much a company or an organization was actually meeting sustainability standards. And there were not a real possibility as well to, let's say, to check and control. And there were no sanctions if a company did not follow the rule. So now the things is that the situation is changing rapidly, and in April this year has been presented a new regulation, actually more than one, but let's stick to the first one, which oblige from next year all big company from 2024, even a smaller company that have a certain kind of characteristic, and also foreign company that have permanent basis in the European Union, to report on their sustainability. And this is a big change that should be read together with another regulation that is being proposed in the US, the so-called due diligence regulation, which actually make compulsory for European company to certify not only their own sustainability, but the sustainability of the whole supply chain. Meaning that if I want to do business in the EU, not only I need to be sustainable, but all my supply chain need to be sustainable. So all the supplier, all the company that I involve, all the partners that will work with me in my supply chain should prove, and in this case, there will be metrics, there will be KPI and principle for this sustainability reporting. And if I don't do that, I will be liable. But the interesting thing is that not only I will be liable to the EU and to the country that may decide to put some fines on my company, but the victims, let's say, so those that are damaged by my activity being not sustainable, can claim for compensation. And of course, I can also be targeted by my competitors that may say that, in fact, my company is not complying with this sustainability directive. And again, when we speak about sustainability for the European Union, we always speak about, let's say, three different legs. One is environmental, which in a way is more or less the easiest part of sustainability, because is easily measurable. There are already standards in the EU that should be followed. There are legislation, law that set threshold. Even if, of course, the regulation on sustainability report is a little bit different, but still, especially for companies that come from outside the EU, it would be probably enough to follow the threshold that already are in place in the Union. Then there are all what we call the social sustainability KPI. And this is a little bit more tricky, because when we come to the social sustainability, within fall all the regulation about the labor market, about the human rights, and about the work condition. And in this case, you can understand that the situation may be very different from country to country. And also it can be enforced in a way that somehow it may also not be fair, let's say, because clearly the regulation are very different. And as a third, let's say, third leg, we have this governance issue. When we speak about governance, again, for the EU regulators, we mean the anti-corruption practice, the integrity, the composition of the board, the people that sit on the board of the companies, and so on and so forth. So these two regulations that are connected with taxonomies, I know, by the way, that even China has his own environmental taxonomy, which, by the way, is not so different from the European one. But this regulation, I think, may have a very strong impact on partnership, trade and commercial flow between EU and basically most of the country of the world, because in a way the EU is saying that either you comply with my principle or you will not be allowed to work with us, because clearly one thing is to be obliged to follow the rule if I settle in the EU. So this was more or less already in place and has been in place for many, many years. But there is a big difference from this, let's say, perspective to the perspective of being compliant, even if I work in my own country, but I just export my product and I work within a supply chain, a value chain, which is global and has its ending point in the EU. You understand that these make a very big difference, and that there are basically two main issues to consider. The possibility that the sustainability could be considered or interpreted in a different way in different countries. And of course, this may somehow create issue and jeopardize the value chain. So I think that this is something that should be taken in very strong consideration, because it changes the cards on the table in a very dramatic and disruptive way, and even if the regulation are yet not in place, but there is a tendency in all Western world, and of course in Europe even more, because the proposal are already there, and I would say that most of the political sphere, the political force in Europe are in favor of the introduction of this regulation. So I can say that they will be introduced for sure. And also the other issue is that the new reporting directive is a directive. That means that in member state, there should be time to approve and to make them enforced in each state of the union. But if we speak about the due diligence regulation, the one I say that companies should prove that they are sustainable along their supply chain, there is a proposal for a regulation, and in terms of the EU law, when a regulation is approved, that regulation is immediately enforceable in each country of the European Union. And this clearly make the situation a little bit more disruptive. Clearly, it is from one side correct that when we speak about sustainability, we take into account the whole life cycle of goods, because it would be a very easy escape to say I'm sustainable, I'm clean, and then push to our supplier all the dirty part. But from another side, especially when sustainability is enlarged to social and governance, there is an issue of the base of the regulation that should be comply with, which are different throughout all the countries. So just that is my small, let's say, contribution. I wanted basically to raise a flag, a red flag on this, because I think it's very important for any kind of future collaboration. It should be found some kind of agreement so that the flow and the cooperation may not be jeopardized by sustainability, which from one side is a good thing, but from the other side, it is happening in a silent way without that all players realize that is happening. And this can be a danger for the global value chains. So this is if any has a question, I would prefer that you do it now, because I may have to leave soon to go in.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Zucca. Thank you for your very clear and brief presentations about on the EU due diligence regulation, which is in the process of legislation now, and it will make a big differences through the EU economic relations with its main economic partners, as you said. And I think the Chinese enterprises and Chinese government should make preparations to deal with these new changes. So as the request by Professor Zucca, is there any question or remarks on the speech of Professor Zucca?
Professor Zucca, may I have one question?
Sure.
Okay, so thank you very much. It's Victor Estra here, and it's good to see you. You mentioned that there is a prospect that this came into power, but do you have a prediction when Chinese and of course all European value chains have to expect that this came into power? So can you provide timeline or something like that?
Yes, sure. For the Corporate Sustainable Directive, it should be approved this year. There are already some regulation that impose reporting on sustainability for 2023 and 2024 for big company and medium or small company that have some kind of listed on the stock exchange, even if they are small. The issue about this deadline is that until the directive has not been issued, the standard will not be set. So it's a little bit tricky. The regulation will be partly in place, but the standard will not be yet in place because they will come probably later this year for big companies and in 2024 for smaller company. There will be two sets of KPI and standards, so there will be two metrics for small and big companies and two different kind of reporting. So in this case, I expect that the regulation will start to be enforceable in 2024. So it's we still have more than a year. If we speak about the due diligence regulation, there is a little bit more complicated to set a time, because the proposal has been already made. So the law is basically on the table, has not been officially, let's say, presented, and it is expected to be presented early next year. So from one side, still there is some time to the official presentation, and then of course it has to go through all the legislative process. But from the other side, as I said, is a regulation. So in this case, as soon as the Commission will approve it, this will become compulsory for all EU country, and it will be enforceable immediately. So I think that the whole bunch of regulation, together also with the two taxonomies, will be fully enforced not before 2024. So I expect that there will be still a year and a half until we will start to see the real effect. But I have to say that to be ready for that, it doesn't take a day, because for a company to prepare everything to include all these standards and KPI and principles in their own reporting, it is something that require not less than 6 months or a year. So from one side, there is time. From the other side, there is not time. So the situation is that companies should start to act even if it is not yet 100% sure what will be the specific metrics and standards. But more or less, of course, there are working groups. So it's possible to have an idea of what will be these working these metrics. But until the law will not be approved, we will not know. But on the other hand, when the law will be approved, we will be already in a situation that we need to provide a reporting on our sustainability. And then, of course, this it will be complicated if have not started to think about it beforehand. So probably it's already now the time to start to look at what is happening and to act, because otherwise the situation may be difficult.
Okay, thank you for the very good question. That is what we actually want to raise, and thank you for your very clear and detailed explanation of Professor Zuka. I think your answer is also very helpful for some Chinese enterprises who are doing business in the European market. So because you have another activity to attend, so I think your speech part is over now. So have a nice day. Thank you, Professor Zuka. Professor Zuka. So now we'll introduce our third speaker of our panel, Mr. T.S. Dams. T.S. Dams is a research fellow at the Klingendijl Institute, the Netherlands Institute of International Relations. And I found some information about Mr. Dams, and his research focuses on China's geopolitical strategy and European responses to it. And in these two distinct fields, he holds in-depth expertise. So his topic today is ESG and geopolitical risk, changing perspectives from European institutional investors. So the floor is yours. Mr. Dams, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you to the organizers of this seminar for inviting me. It's been fascinating and very enlightening so far, and it's a very valuable opportunity to once again exchange ideas with fellow European partners, as well as such esteemed thinkers from China. Due to COVID, it has been quite a long while since I've had the opportunity to directly have such an exchange of ideas, and given the geopolitical stresses that are escalating, it becomes increasingly important to indeed avoid misunderstandings and understand one another's point of view. So thank you very much for the organizers, and also to the chair. I will only have a few brief remarks as an introduction, and from a particular perspective. And I've prepared a short presentation, but I think for convenience's sake, I will just rather tell you than put it on the on the Zoom link. I think it's fine like this. First, I will talk a little bit about my perspective and the limits of my perspective, because I think I can make a contribution from some particular research projects and experiences we've had at Klingendahl in the last couple of years, but that certainly doesn't cover the grand topic of the title of my presentation. And then I will make some points related to the substance of that topic. But first, let me say I'm based in the Netherlands, in Western Europe. And a number of years ago, together with AXA IM, a big asset manager, investment manager, located in various European countries, we set up the China platform for European institutional investors to provide basic knowledge of Chinese governance and economics and geopolitical trends concerning China to European institutional investors. And our main points of contact have been, as I've said, asset managers in a number of countries, in Germany and France, but mostly the Netherlands, and also Dutch pension funds. And this is of particular interest because pension funds in many countries aren't such substantial investors. In Holland, they're huge, right? So especially in relation to the Dutch economy, but also globally, Dutch pension funds have very big capital reserves and adding up to about 1,200 billion. And so when it comes to the perspective of European institutional investors, particularly Western European institutional investors in the Netherlands, those pension funds are the big players. And what I would like to share with you today is a short view on the changing perspective that these institutional investors have had in the last couple of years, that have changed quite quickly and dramatically, I think, and where that ends up today. And there is my focus on the geopolitical context and the way the geopolitical context impacts the viewpoint of these actors on China-EU relations and their investments in China. As I've said, my expertise is in geopolitical strategy. I'm not an economist or someone who works in finance per se, but we've been working with these financial market actors, these institutional investors, for the last couple of years to bridge the gap between those worlds. And I think actually not just for our work, but on the macro level, that becomes increasingly important as tensions grow. So a very particular perspective, and certainly I can speak for all of Europe or a vast part of China-EU relations, but I will just pinpoint some changes in the perspective of these very particular but very interesting actors, namely Western European institutional investors. And I think Professor Zuka has been very eloquent already in pointing out a number of the challenges that I was going to mention too, but let me approach it from a different way. So only in 2017, 18, 19, again, to take the example of Dutch pension funds, were reporting large amounts of investments, direct investments in China, and they were growing by the year. So I think in 2018, they had a cumulative investment, or the large pension funds had a cumulative investment of 20 billion euros in China, which is a big deal certainly for the Netherlands, and it was growing by roughly 2% a year. And the general atmosphere was that investing in China, and in particular in a number of particular industries, but foremost sustainable investments in green finance, was not just increasingly important but crucial to achieving not just the economic targets these pension funds set themselves, but to achieve some of the ESG standards and ambitions that they want to achieve. So investing in Chinese green finance was seen as a very crucial part of achieving the sustainability goals of these large institutional investors. And in a way that in some ways that has stayed the same, but the context has become rapidly a lot more difficult. And that's really come from, again, from their perspective, from these actors' perspective, uncertainty has arisen in the last couple of years due to a couple of factors, both China domestic and international. I think it has created an awareness amongst these institutional investors that a very general picture of let's just invest in China is no longer good enough, but especially when it comes to the common prosperity policies and the changes in the way Chinese economy is structured, a specific idea of which industries will be growth industries and which industries may suffer from or maybe subject to more regulation is incredibly important. Just to name an example, a large asset manager in the Netherlands decided to pull out much of its China investments when the home tutoring industry was newly regulated in China. And I think this indicates that, you know, beforehand there was, even though they weren't directly invested in that, ironically, but I think that indicates this change of perspective, that beforehand there was much trust in a further general liberalization of the Chinese economy. And now these asset managers have, after a first scare, are trying to particularize their strategies and seeing where liberalization and openness to foreign investment is going to increase and where, in which industries that's not going to be the case. So that was a big issue. And of course, international factors concerning China are of great importance in that. All of these large institutional investors have huge interests in China, but oftentimes slightly bigger interest, and I mean slightly because they're starting to rival in a way, in the US, and the various regulations and sanctions coming from the US related to China have been a major cause of worry and a relatively big surprise to these actors. So right now, I think the general attitude is one of reaction, of trying to apply as best as possible to these to the possible extraterritorial effects of US sanctions, but a big question mark as to where that's going. So these have been driving quite rapid changes in the perspective of these large institutional investors concerning China. And I think a third one is, and this is an other non-financial, but I think incredibly important field of my own research, and that is Chinese soft power in Europe, and especially in Western Europe. So the debate on China has been rapidly changing, really in the last 4 years, in France, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, across the board, and in many, really in a similar way in all of Western Europe. And again, to give the Dutch example, the Dutch pension funds are governed by a mix of employers' representatives and employees' representatives. And these representatives are asked to represent the viewpoints of their constituents, so of the employees, for instance, of large industrial sectors. And as you see, China's soft power being harmed in the last couple of years in the eyes of general electorates in Western Europe, you see pension funds reacting to that and trying to prove to their constituents that they are either rapidly scaling down their investments in China or at least scaling up the checks and balances against ESG violations as they see it, possibly concerning their investments in China. So that soft power switch, I think, is vital to understanding the changes of these institutional investors' behavior and perspectives. And that has led to really ESG and geopolitical risk being connected domains on their desks of these asset managers and institutional investors, like that wasn't the case in decades before. And I think that's very interesting. So I think geopolitical risk has been a relatively minor, and country-related risk has been a relatively minor factor of a priori strategy for these actors. They have been forming their strategies from the basic point of view, always taking into account some sense of country risk. But as the Financial Times writes, even this morning, country risk is back, and it's no longer a minor point on the a priori strategy agenda. It's become a major point, and it's also become a major point vis-a-vis China. And ESG has always been a posteriori check, I would say. So many of these asset managers have laid out investment strategies and then put in place checks and balances to see whether these strategies do in fact meet ESG standards. And I think because of the politicization of some of these ESG issues related to investments in China amongst Western European electorates, and the connection of ESG issues and geopolitical strategic issues in, for instance, American sanctions, ESG and geopolitical risk have both become a priori issues and actually have become a priori issues that are high on the strategic agenda of these large institutional investors. And that's a crucial change in perspective and very interesting. And I think it's very new. And so these actors are certainly struggling to see how they can operationalize that change of perspective. They're really struggling with that. And I don't think there are easy answers yet. And on top of that, indirect China-related geopolitical risk, as these actors call it, is becoming a growing concern. And so this concerns the way European, the top 50 European Euronext companies are affected by China-related geopolitical risk. Because at the beginning of this scare, I would say this geopolitics is back scare, there was a general sense of, okay, well, divesting from China and into Europe will help mitigate that risk. But of course, many of the top 50 Euronext European companies are incredibly interwoven with China and will suffer from or be subject to China-related geopolitical risk, whether coming from Washington or other places. Maybe not as much as FDI in China, but certainly also to a great extent. And so divesting from China and into Europe isn't the easier way out that it may have seemed for a short while in the beginning of this, geopolitics is back scare. So this indirect risk is a growing concern for investors, and that will lead investors to demand more transparency amongst leading European companies in how they manage and mitigate their China-related geopolitical risk. This is going to be very interesting to see whether they find actionable frameworks to do so, and whether the regulatory frameworks that Professor Zucca has already mentioned will help in that, or that it will all add up to a general sense of let's just pull back. This is, I think, a very crucial dilemma where these institutional investors are right now. And then to make it even more complicated, there is, a consistent awareness of the importance of investing in Chinese green finance for meeting the sustainability standards that also Dutch pension funds and large Western European institutional investors have committed themselves to under the Paris Agreement and the European Green Deal. And so there is really a very strong dilemma that is only beginning to be felt by these actors, where pulling back or scaling back investments may reduce geopolitical risk, but it will and may reduce some very important issues in ESG risk, but it will also harm part of the ESG agenda. And this is going to be a major point of concern. And I think what that adds up to is, at the very least, the increasing importance of working together, working forward on the convergence of that Chinese and EU taxonomy. That's going to be a crucial part of moving forward if there is going to be a moving forward. And as Professor Zucca already mentioned, these taxonomies are already relatively similar, but the trust, especially in European partners, in the way that taxonomy is applied in China is still lacking. And if you see reports by for instance, Asset Managers of China Association, self-reporting is still lacking. I think only 38% of companies attached to that body have been doing the self-reporting on ESG issues to a satisfactory extent according to Chinese taxonomy. So there's a taxonomy issue, and it's not just the convergence of standards, but it's the trust in the power of the framework. And actually, I think if real progress can be booked in that respect in the coming years, some of the scaling back of financial ties between China and Europe can be mitigated. But then real progress has to be made, and European partners will have to step up their game to ensure that they know what they're doing in China and to validate their trust in their investments in China. And that's going to be a huge challenge, not just for the financial actors, but for European cooperation and certainly also for the Chinese-European dialogue. And just to end maybe on a fairly dramatic note, but it's just to give you a sense of how this issue lives with these large institutional investors, where only in 2018 they were running these numbers that I mentioned, 20 billion of investments of Dutch venture funds in China growing by 2% a year. Some of these large institutional investors are seriously worrying that in 5 years' time, China won't be a market for them anymore. And I don't think that has to be the case at all. I think that's overly dramatic. But to mitigate that risk, there certainly we have to make some steps. And I think today is a wonderful opportunity to see what those steps might be, so that these actors can also get ready to work on that, especially also from the European side. So my very short introduction, and thank you very much for this opportunity to share my thoughts from a particular perspective from Western Europe, the Netherlands, and the geopolitical frame of mind, but hopefully worthwhile to the general discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. James. Thank you very much for your very clear and very
I've lost connection to the moderator.
Me either.
Okay.
So we lost connection. So thank you very much for your.
Can you hear? Can you hear us now? Can you hear me now?
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, and we can see that the geopolitical factors have become the more have been playing more and more important parts on the decisions of European institutional investors to invest or not in Chinese assets. So, and you also talked about some huge challenges between China and EU to move forward our economic relations. So thank you very much for your very excellent speech. And now we will make some discussions later. After our the last speaker, Professor Ye Bin. Our last but not least speaker is my colleague, Professor Ye Bin, is the head of division of the EU law studies at our institute. And he has been following the EU's foreign economic laws in recent years and published a lot of papers in this field. Today, his topic is from embedded values to critical raw materials, how the EU forges new toolbox to decouple China from its supply chains. So, the floor is yours, Professor Ye.
Good morning to our European colleagues and good afternoon to our Chinese colleagues. I'm very glad to report my observe from legal perspective how the EU forges new toolbox to decouple China from its supply chain. And I also want to have a suggestion to China and the EU to act from my personal perspective. I'd like to briefly report the EU legislative proposals or regulation recent year to decouple China from its supply chain. It's actually before 2016, there was rare EU or EU legislation to deal with China issues. But since 1916, the first regulation on the WTO issues, then the EU regulation on FDI screening, the EU introduced more and more legislations to deal or to redress its concerns on China's growing influence on EU's internal markets. And I try to list it, and then I distinguish the legislations into two stages. 下一步怎么办呢？下一页，这个就是下一页 ，next。
在那儿弄就行了。
就是不知道怎么进入下一页，不是不在我，就在这个电脑上。Next， 你怎么拖不动？Oh, okay. The first stage, actually, we can came back to the 2019 June communication by the European Commission, and in EU Commission's EU-China Strategic Outlook paper, it announced a lot of the initiatives to reduce its concerns on China trade or investment issues. For example, the 5G toolbook, it was introduced in 2020, and screening of the FDI. It will be, actually, this regulation is formally came into first. Yes. 他帮我弄。Next slide, thank you. Next. Yes. And the next foreign subsidies instrument, it was it adopted it was adopted, it entered into first this year, August 2020, and the European also introduced the anti-coercion instrument last year, December, and the most important legislation proposal is concerned about corporate sustainability due diligence, and it's very much concerned to Professor Tsuka has mentioned about the corporate sustainability reporting directive. It's a very new directive, and it will be very much a lot of the influence on European side, also the external territorial effect on third countries, and also trying to briefing the stage 2. Next slide. Next. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. The stage 2 is it's not only 3, but I just listed 3 initiatives proposed or launched this year, last month, addressed by the President von der Leyen. For example, the Critical Raw Material Act, it was announced by the Commissioner Thierry Breton on this September, and another one is the first emergency instrument. It's a comprehensive legislative package adopted by the European Commission. We can see the two stage. First stage is before the COVID-19. Stage 2 is this year, and I try to distinguish this. Next, please. I try to distinguish these legislations from its function and characteristics. Next slide, please. Okay. Yes, I try to distinguish the legislation into different types. For example, embodied values, ideology on market economy, competition or competitiveness, protection, finance or reciprocity, emergency management, and critical concerns. Try to distinguish the legislation into the 6. And next, I will briefly introduction what's the legislation's function. Yeah, the first is about the two legislation. The proposal for due diligence directive. It was promoted by Germany, and actually France has also introduced its the vigilance 2017, and the German also adopted a new law on corporate sustainability due diligence this year, and it will come into force next year. And this proposal, the European is a European Commission version, is now so ambitious than the proposal posted by the European Parliament, but it will have a huge impact on about 13,000 European companies and more than 3,000 companies from third countries. That means the huge companies, international companies, will be falling into the scope of this proposal if it can come in first. And another one is the ban for the product made with personal labor. My remarks is from positive impact. I think this kind of the legislation it will be a European model for human rights-based economy. It's a new European transformation, and it will promote international sustainability. But the problem is it's a unilateral legislation with a huge extraterritorial effect. It may make some side effects. And this legislation demonstrates non-discrimination and some European values. Is very different to the U.S. method. U.S. method to demonize the Xinjiang cotton. I think is the European way and the American way is quite different. And the European is its normative effect is legislation include the local and imported production with a non-discriminatory way, and I think it's not it has a trade effect. It also has its effect, the positive impact on its internal market, its internal human rights governance. But the negative impact, I think, is these proposals will be liable to be politicalized as a trade protectionism instrument. It's quite easy, or there is a huge risk to be misused or to discriminate upon disinformation, and the error would aim at an imaginary target. And the last cost will be paid by the European consumers. And I think the European Commission, should to calculate the cost on the European consumers. And another category is the ideology on market economy. For example, the foreign subsidy instrument is introduced by the Commission on 2021. This initiative is a very, it also have a huge impact on the current EU-China trade relations. And my personal remark is it may be make the comprehensive agreement, investment agreement between China and the EU into a very awkward situation, because actually this proposal is going to close the investment market into Chinese enterprise owned by the states. And another one is the next. Thank you. Another category of the legislation is more focused on the competitiveness or protection, or pursue reciprocity, and also show EU's emergency response or management concerns. And in these lists, I want to focus on the single market emerging instrument. I think also this new, very new proposal has a lot. I can understand the European Parliament or European Council want to build its reservoir for emergency materials, but they also cost a lot of the capitals or monies on some these emergency instruments. And next, thank you. The last, not the least, is the critical concerns from the European side is, for example, the FDI screening mechanism. It's coming into force 2020, and another one is the Critical Raw Material Act is just announced by the Commissioner Thierry Breton last month. The proposal has not published yet. I think from my personal perspective, I think it is quite very much have a lot of the impact on Chinese trade into European market. And then the new legislation will agree with the security concerns, or the trade, the traditional security, or the modernized security concerns of the de-globalization sentiment, which is contended by geopolitics and ideology. Our colleague team then just analyzed the geopolitics among in the context of the EU-China trade. And next, please. And I try to understand the European perspective. There are two proposals from the European side. One way is to a full decoupling from China, full decoupling. Another one choice or option is China +1. That means, China is quite difficult. Is possible to the full decoupling from China is economical possible, but the China +1 strategy seem a more liable scenario. It's this it was reported by David Ramsey from ISS. It's a European think tank. Yeah, I very much agree with his opinion. Is in any scenario, consumers will likely end up paying a much higher price for product reliability. Yeah. From next, please. From yeah, and then to add the report. Yeah, just the speech by the executive vice president Dombrovskis yesterday. He said decommitment from China is not an option for our company, it's European companies, and the European Union will focus on the diversification and better risk management. And this is also mentioned by the sports. And the EU will continue engaging with China with pragmatics and without naivety. And the trading relationship need more balance and reciprocity. Yeah. I think maybe it's a very typical version to the China plus one, but maybe the EU also want to redefining the way. So it's let's to follow up the Europeans' choice. And the last is my personal humble suggestion. Yeah, please, next. Next. Yeah. I'd like to suggest to deepen globalization in an open and constructive way. I think for the European side, it's time for the EU to consider the feasibility to unfazing the CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment between EU and China. I think it's time to conclude the agreement trade between EU and China. I think it will build a warmer atmosphere for both sides. And for China, I think we can launch a new negotiation with European Union or other interested country to guarantee open and connected global critical supply chain, including critical raw material supply, critical medical or pharmaceutical supply, even energy supply, and other critical or concerns from both sides. It could lead to a bilateral or plurilateral or multilateral treaty or an international organization. As its core principle, to maintain global critical supply chain with good faith, and very, very rare exceptions should be added into international rulebook. And I think it should be a new legal obligation to contracting parties. This treaty or institution could be under a space of the AIIB, also, of course, the WTO or other entities in treated forum. Thank you. It's my contribution. Thank you very much. Welcome to the comments.
Thank you, Professor Ye. Professor Ye gave in his speech, he gave us a very clear and picture and roadmap of the EU legislation aiming to adjust its economic relations with China, and it also gave us his suggestions to promote China-EU economic cooperation. Thank you for Professor Ye. And I'm a little bit nervous because the bell rings warned me that we are running out of time, and I'm not a good moderator, and I didn't manage the time very well. But because our 4 speeches are all very excellent, so I still want to give an opportunity to participate, to raise just one question to our speakers. Okay, so is there any question?
I see there's a question in the chat window.
Yep.
啊，
for Thais.
给我看一下，我看不见这个。
对，字太小。
This is a question for Professor T.S. Professor T.S., can you see the question in the chat?
Yes, I can.
For information on the European pension funds direct investment in China, what's your view on the sustainability of the American pension funds in Europe?
It's a very good question and one I haven't considered in depth, so I'll have to share some initial thoughts, but it's certainly a topic that demands more thoughts later on. But I think, and it depends on what sustainability means in this sense, sustainability in the green ESG sense, or sustainability in the let's say the projected presence of these funds in Europe. But I think if it means the second thing, then you know, European engagement on that level won't. There aren't big issues lying ahead when it comes to ESG standards and so forth. I think there's bigger issues and there's greater concern, although I'm not sure specifically how these relate or in what way they are already impacting pension fund relations. But there are growing concerns about sustainability policy of the US government beyond the current administration. And just to give some initial thoughts and a very short answer, I think asking or looking from the perspective again of these Western European institutional investors, and particularly Dutch pension funds, the prospect of sustainability policy in a next Republican administration in Washington is a great cause of concern. So I would think that at least partly explains or answers the question. I hope it does. If not, feel free to reach out after the session. I'd love to talk a little bit more about this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your very quick and clear answer. So we have to stop here. I was informed by the organizer because in order to ensure that our whole conference won't prolong too much, we have to stop here our panel, and we will have 5 minutes for break, and all the participants will come back at 几点？5分钟以后。现在是
58。
现在是58。
5点05分吧。
At 11:05 Central European time, 11:05. So thank you for all the speakers in the panel 1. Thank you very much. 5分钟是吧？
So, ladies and gentlemen, our second panel is about to start. So, welcome you back, all of you. And for those who are joining to our workshop today, my name is Viktor Eszterhelyi. I'm a senior research fellow at the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and I'm going to be the moderator of the second panel. In the previous panel, we had a wonderful discussion about the global value chain development trends and how does it affect the European-Chinese relations. And I hope this will be continued in this panel as well. In the second panel, we will have 4 distinguished scholars. First, I would like to ask or invite Professor Changyuan Luo, who is a professor at Fudan University. And his title is going to be, his presentation is going to be the political relations in the era of global value chains. So I would like to give the opportunity to Professor Luo. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. So let me share my screen.
Sure.
Can you see it?
Yes, yes, we can.
Yeah. Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, it's my great honor to be here. Yeah. This is ongoing research work with my colleague Wang Ning. Yeah, the title of the presentation is Supply Chain and Political Relations. So with respect to motivation, yeah, we have some observations. Yeah, you know that South Korea and Australia are important trade partners of China. And China signed free trade agreement with both countries in 2015. China is also the largest trade partner of both countries. And China and South Korea also have a good political relationship. However, political relations between China and Australia have deteriorated in the past few years. So, according to our observation, maybe this difference maybe is related to the types, the different types of supply chain relation between China and 2 countries. Yeah, China and Korea actually has a close and deep supply chain relation. However, China and Australia trade is dominated by primary goods and industrial manufactured goods, making a deep and close supply chain relationship. So what we concern is about the impact of trade in the area of supply chain. Yeah, for traditional trade, yeah, we know that we emphasize the division of labor and trading, and the boundary between the buyer and the seller is quite clear. But for supply chain trade, yeah, we still emphasize the division of labor, but we also, emphasize cooperation or collaboration between countries. And the boundary between the buyer and the seller actually is quite blurry. So the question we want to answer is, yeah, how trade in the supply chain area affects international political relations. Yeah. And are political relations affected by the supply chain relationship between 2 countries? So if the difference between China-South Korea political relations and China-Australia political relations, yeah, related to the different supply chain relations between China and two countries. So in literature, yeah, you know that there is a huge literature about the relationship between trade and political relations. Yeah, especially in the in politics and in international relations. Yeah, one view is that trade leads to peace. Yeah, not only theoretically but also empirically. Yeah, but another view is that maybe trade leads to conflict. Yeah, the same, not only theoretically but also empirically. In economics, yeah, there is also some papers, yeah, which investigate the impact of trade on political relations. Yeah, Martin's paper in 2008, yeah, paid early attention to this topic. Yeah, they believe that trade can promote peace, but multilateral trade maybe reduce the interdependence between specific countries and increase the possibility of conflict between them. And the paper written by Kleiman in 2020 maybe is more relevant to our paper. And they find that the economic friendship between trade partners will strengthen the political friendship between two countries. For previous literature, our comments, yeah, are as follows. First, yeah, few studies have discussed the impact of trade on international political relations, yeah, from the perspective of supply chain. Second, yeah, traditional gross trade maybe is not enough to reflect the division of labor and cooperation in the area of supply chain. And it is also very difficult to capture the impact of supply chain trade on international political relations. From theory, we believe that supply chain can produce impact on political relations, yeah, for many reasons. The first one is maybe the argument of opportunity cost. Yeah, if two countries have a close and deep supply chain relation, yeah, the opportunity cost of conflict may be higher, so they tend to avoid conflict. Yeah, and the second is the argument of signaling. Yeah, if two countries, if political relations of two countries are in trouble, maybe one of them maybe is likely to resort to economic sanctions. Yeah, if two countries have a close and deep, supply chain relation, maybe the threat maybe is more credible. So the other side, yeah, maybe is likely to compromise. The third one is the argument of interest group. Yeah, if two countries have a close and deep supply chain relation, maybe more interest groups are involved. So they have motivation to lobby the government to avoid conflict with trade partners. Yeah. The final one is the argument of spillover effect. Yeah, if two countries, yeah, have a close and deep supply chain relation, yeah, the conflict in one area maybe will be spilled over to other areas. So considering this, maybe both countries maybe also have motivation to avoid conflict. Yeah. So based on the existing literature and our theoretical discussion, we propose the following hypothesis. Yeah, a closer supply chain relationship maybe is more helpful to develop and stabilize good political relations. And the impact depends on the types of supply chain relationship. Yeah, close or loose, simple or complex, symmetry or asymmetry, yeah, complementary or competitive. So this is an empirical study. Yeah, the explained variable is the political relations between two countries. So we employ the vote of the General Assembly to construct a measurement of political relations between two countries. So we construct voting similarity index. So we have S-score, Pi-score, and Kappa score. But the limitation of voting similarity index is that they cannot control the difference of voting content. So this limitation, yeah, has been improved in Bailey's work in 2017. They proposed an indicator of the ideal point of foreign policy. The smaller of the ideal point distance between two countries, the closer their foreign policies are, and the more friendly their political relations are. The key explanatory variable is supply chain relations. We refer to Duval's paper in 2016 to construct supply chain relations between two countries. So in this equation, the denominator is the sum of two countries, is the sum of economic scale of two countries. And the numerator is the sum of value-added trade of two countries. So DVAIJ is the value-added export from country I to country J. And the DVAJI is the value-added export from country J to country I. And we also include some control variables, yeah, whether two countries are neighboring countries and whether they are allies. And we also control the gap of institutional quality of two countries, and the gap of GDP growth rate of two countries, and the gap of GDP per capita of two countries. And the political relations, the data from Bailey's work and ATOP database. And with respect to supply chain relations, yeah, we employ ADB Marial database. Yeah, so we have a pilot data of 60 countries from 2007 to 2020. So this is our empirical model. The explain variable is a political relation between two countries. The key explanatory variable is supply chain between two countries. And due to time limit, I skip the technical issues. Yeah, so this is our baseline estimation results. Yeah, we find that supply chain, yeah, actually has a negative and significant impact on policy distance between two countries. So a closer supply chain relation, yeah, need to smaller policy difference means maybe they have a higher, I mean, voting similarity, or they are more friendly, I mean, in politic relationship. Yeah. And we also conduct some robustness checks. Yeah, with respect to vote, we focus on important issues only. The results are shown in column 1. And in vote, we exclude nuclear issues, and the results are in column 2, and the results remain almost the same. And in column 3 to column 5, we use a voting similarity as a explain variable, S score, kappa score, pi score. All of them suppose that supply chain relationship, maybe a closer supply chain relationship, maybe leads to higher similarity of voting. And we also conduct additional robustness checks, and the results still remain the same. And then we discuss, the different types of supply chain relations. So we refer to literature to construct an indicator to capture the closeness of supply chain relations. And we also refer to literature to construct an indicator to reflect the complexity of supply chain relationship. By constructing indicators, we divide the sample into sub groups. In column 1 and column 2, we have loose supply chain relation, and in column 2 we have close supply chain relation. We find that compared to loose supply chain relation, a closer supply chain relationship leads to a smaller policy difference between two countries. And in column 3 and column 4, we have a group for simple supply chain relation, and we also have complex supply chain relation. We find that compared to simple supply chain relation, two countries, if two countries have a complex supply chain relations, maybe their political relations are much better. And we also refer to literature to construct the symmetry or asymmetry of supply chain dependency. So we find that compared to a weak symmetry, strong symmetry of supply chain dependency and leads to much better political relations. And we also take into account the degree of the participation in the global supply chain of two countries. We refer to literature to define the degree of a country's participation in the global supply chain based on not only forward linkages, but also backward linkages. We find that whatever measurement we use, forward linkage or backward linkage, we find that if for two countries, if one of them has a high degree of global supply chain participation, then supply chain relations between them are more supportive and helpful to develop and stabilize good political relations between them. And finally, we also take into account the position in the global supply chain of two countries. We also refer to existing literature to measure a country's position in the global supply chain. And we find that if two countries are more complementary in the global supply chain, the supply chain relations between them are more helpful to develop and stabilize good political relations. But if they are more competitive in the global supply chain, then the supply chain relations between them maybe is less supportive or helpful to develop and stabilize political relations between them. So this is a very preliminary research. We have three main findings. First, the supply chain relationship between two countries maybe has a positive impact on international political relations. And when the supply chain relation between trade partners is closer, more complex, maybe the positive impact of supply chain relationship on political relations is much stronger. And the more symmetrical the two countries' dependence on the supply chain, and the deeper their participation in the global supply chain, and the complementary their positions in the global supply chain, the stronger the positive impact of the supply chain relationship on political relations. So our findings maybe shed some light on the issues, about the relationship between China and the European Union. So if both sides have a deeper, closer, and complementary, or more symmetrical, supply chain relationship, maybe political relations will benefit from such trade relationship. So this is my pretension. Your comments are quite welcome. Thanks. Yeah.
Professor Loh, thank you very much. This was really a thought-provoking presentation, and I have to confess, I was thinking, how can I borrow some of your thoughts in my own research?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this great presentation.
Thank you, yeah.
And then I would like to introduce our second speaker. He is Peter Górecki. He's a senior analyst and also the manager of Asia Pacific Research Program, the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So Peter, he's my colleague. So Peter, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Victor, and thank you for getting invited to this panel discussion. So let me welcome everyone. And I've also prepared a couple of slides, so I will try to share my screen now. I hope I will succeed. Is it okay? Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So I will focus my presentation on two main questions. One is, what are the main factors behind the supply chain disruptions that we have been experiencing recently in the global economy? And the second will be, what effects could these disruptions have on EU-China economic relations? So first, what's behind all those phenomena that we call disruption of supply chains today? The disruption of supply chains is often associated with the COVID crisis. So we like to consider this is the COVID as a watershed event. However, the phenomenon is much more complex. The pandemic is not the only reason for those challenges that we have been witnessing. Today, we can already conclude that the pandemic only amplified some trends and accelerated the transformation of the global economy and highlighted the unsustainability of global supply chains. So let's take a closer look at the main reasons of why we are witnessing an unprecedented and prevailing turmoil in global and regional supply chains. If we identify those reasons, then maybe it's easier to analyze the possible effects of the supply chain disruption on EU-China economic relations. The first of those factors is the increasing geopolitical tensions. So due to the US-China tariff war and other international trade disputes, a number of companies had started to build inventories, which moved the demand and supply out of their balance. And since the 70 to 80% of international trade involves global value chains, trade disputes have a disruptive event on value chains. And the introduction of new tariffs had generated a shift in trade that put further stress on global logistics. And beyond that, the economic self-reliance and the restriction of foreign direct investments in some sectors had put high on political agendas, or were put high on political agendas already in the pre-COVID era. And this manifested also in launching new national FDI screening mechanisms. Geopolitics was gaining importance quickly among location selection factors of manufacturing companies, especially in the United States and the European Union. And the discourse in the EU about creating some sort of strategic autonomy was already ongoing before the COVID outbreak. And we can say that we are moving towards a data-driven global economy. This is the near future, or in some cases already the present. And we can declare that the corporate value creation was already going through a major transformation before the pandemic. So the age of the linear or pyramid-like value chains was already coming to an end. And instead of that, business entities were moving towards establishing so-called value-creating ecosystems and the digital supply networks. The term supply chain 4.0 expresses the fourth industrial revolution transforms supply chains. It's about the application of Internet of Things, the use of advanced robotics, the application of advanced analytics of big data in supply chain management. So companies place sensors in everything, create networks everywhere, automate anything and analyze everything in order to improve significantly their performance and the satisfaction of their customers. So then came the COVID pandemic, and we can say that there were turmoils in global production and logistic networks already before or in the pre-COVID era. Just two examples for that. There was the earthquake in the island of Taiwan in 1999, which disrupted the production of computer chips, or the tsunami in Japan in 2011 that resulted in a shutdown of plants, faltering maritime transportation, and the slowdown in automotive parts supply. But the COVID crisis differs from the previous ones in a sense that we are talking about a series of turbulences that hit several regions and countries at the same time. The impact of the COVID pandemic on manufacturing industries and related supply chains is well known. The lockdowns in factories, port congestions, and other problems with international logistics. And local flare-ups of the pandemic continue to maintain this stress on supply chains. A good example for that was the 2-month-long Shanghai lockdown earlier this year. So the COVID and its consequences revealed the dependence of Europe on Asian suppliers in medical equipment, in drug API, and triggered the call for more self-sufficiency. And this quest for more self-sufficiency has become especially strong in the semiconductor industry, in which the COVID crisis amplified some problems and revealed some exposures. The next such factor behind supply chain disruptions is the energy crisis. Normal operations of manufacturing sectors are disrupted by the energy crisis as well. That extends to a growing number of major and developed economies. It started again well before the Ukraine crisis. It's not well. It's the Ukraine war amplified this process. And a good example for that was the power outages in some regions of China in 2021 that halted production and put further pressure on global supply chains. And most recently, also in Germany, many companies indicate that they cannot maintain production activity with such high energy costs. The next one is the Ukraine crisis, the war. Manufacturing activity halted at sites in war-torn territories, especially in the automotive industry, and several European OEM companies had to start looking for alternative sources of supply of key parts made in Ukraine. For example, Volkswagen and BMW aim to find alternative suppliers from China and Mexico, so which points towards a further reconfiguration of supply chains. So this bunch of challenges that disrupted value chains and accelerated the ongoing transformation resulted in the rise of, I would like to show my next slide. Yes, this one. So all these challenges that disrupted supply chains and accelerated the ongoing transformation resulted in the rise of some new priorities, mainly three of them. The first one is diversification. Global companies are evaluating scenarios to decentralize their manufacturing footprint and diversify their supplier base in order to improve the resilience and the flexibility of their supply chains. The next such relatively new imperative is self-reliance. Technological sovereignty has become a new buzzword as countries are trying to decrease their exposure to other countries in key industries, mainly due to increasing geopolitical tensions. And last but not least, the third one is sustainability. Countries try to move towards a more sustainable FDI stock, which means economic activity that is more resilient to the climate change and to unexpected turmoils of the global economy. And my next point is, as I've indicated at the beginning, is what effects these new priorities may have on EU-China economic relations. Let's take a look at first diversification. Supply chains of many European companies are dependent on China, so reducing exposure to China as a manufacturing location or as a supplier base will certainly remain high on the agenda of politicians and corporate executives throughout Europe. China's zero COVID policy and the experiences of the Shanghai lockdown this year seem to provide further arguments for that. So the major dilemma is whether to reshore or not to reshore, whether to bring manufacturing back to Europe from China or not. And according to a survey made by Buck Consultants, over 60% of European and US manufacturing companies expect the next 3 years, to reshore some part of their Asia production. And 1 out of 5 among those companies expect to repatriate the majority of their China and Asia production capacity. And still, we do not see high levels of reshoring, especially not in Europe. And it's because that there are substantial hurdles that should be overcome. Higher operating costs in Europe and the US due to lack of scale and the lack of supplier bases in these regions. These are major hurdles. So it's not an easy decision at all. Instead of a massive reshoring wave, we can see that we see that European companies are reevaluating their China strategy. Surely there will be examples for companies completely reshoring their China activity. There will be examples for accelerating diversification within Asian manufacturing locations, and surely there will be examples for the being in China for China strategy, which means that China is no longer an export platform of European companies, a global export platform, but they locate production in China to supply the local market. This may be also a good decision, a good choice to reduce logistics risks. And there's also a new watchword, it's friendshoring, as the US Treasury Secretary called the locating of production to so-called trusted countries. Of course, this proposal adds a strong geopolitical dimension to the reconfiguration of supply chains. However, it remains to be seen whether this concept will gain popularity among European companies or not. But altogether, I think the choice is often industry specific. For FDI from the European Union to China, surprisingly exceeded the pre-pandemic levels in the first half of 2022, despite all these supply chain issues. Then this was particularly due to automotive FDI, and especially from Germany, flowing to China in the first 6 months. What was the reason for that? The evolution of the electric vehicle supply chains is currently underway. And Europe and China are leaders in terms of EV adoption. which I think sets the direction of future market expansion for both European and Chinese automotive companies. But not only European automotive FDI inflow to China increases, but we have seen some announcements of Chinese mega projects in Europe as well, mostly from electric vehicle battery manufacturers. A good example for that was the record-breaking project of CATL in Hungary. The Chinese company's new production plant in Hungary will supply batteries to OEM customers across Europe. And let's not forget that this new form of locating manufacturing close to key customers fits perfectly to the concept of flexible and more resilient supply chains, and already mentioned imperative after all those disruptive events. And this results in a rapid increase of Chinese greenfield FDI projects in the EU, which is a relatively new phenomenon. Chinese companies need to have a local presence in some sectors. For example, EV batteries are costly to be transported from China to European markets. And being closer to customers, that creates shorter and more secure supply chains. And this has, I think, the potential to trigger FDI projects in the other's homeland. So altogether, we are going to see, I think, a flexible mix of nearshoring, reshoring, and friendshoring. And the second imperative is self-reliance. Apart from automotive, in other sectors, the call for self-reliance could easily shrink the trade and FDI flows between the EU and China. The pharmaceutical industry is a good example for that, in which it is the EU's declared goal to bring home the production of drug APIs. Or we can mention the EU's ambitious plan to invest 43 billion euros in its semiconductor industry. However, for me, it's a question whether an entire value chain of a given industry can be replicated in the EU. One major hurdle can be the availability of skilled labor pool. And even if it is feasible at all, still there is the question of profitability and innovation. The latter will be definitely hindered by the lack of cross-border cooperation. And there are a number of sectors in which it is not easy to get around China. China is a key producer of electronics and many raw materials, so it will definitely maintain its dominant position in global value chains. So despite all these obstacles, it is most probable that we are going to see further efforts to increase self-reliance and technological sovereignty from the EU side, which has the potential to narrow down the trade and FDI flows and economic cooperation in general with China in some sectors. And last but not least, sustainability. Here, this term refers to environmental and operational sustainability as well. As for the environmental part of the story, we can expect increasing demand for renewable energy equipment. The Ukraine crisis again only amplified this trend. And this can put China a global leader in the production, export, and installation of solar panels and wind turbines in an even more dominant position in its trade relations. So this trend could increase trade volumes between the EU and China. And regarding the operational sustainability, the spread of digital supply chain technologies can be a way for the future. There's a need for closer cooperation between European companies and Chinese suppliers in implementing the technologies and to create a more predictable supply partnerships. In order to get prepared for unexpected events along the supply chain, companies will have to have an insight to their supplier status at tier 2 level or even beyond. So they will have time to work out plan B with their tier 1 supplier partner. Altogether, cooperation along supply chain 4.0 certainly has its potential. And in my final slide, I would like to summarize my thoughts. The first key takeaway is that we are witnessing a reconfiguration of supply chains along 3 emerging priorities or imperatives: diversification, self-reliance, and sustainability. Geopolitics will increasingly impact business decisions, that's sure, business decisions of European companies regarding China. And based on these 3 priorities, I think there will be no new normal that could be applied for all industries. companies have to find their own response to the supply chain disruption and the ideal manufacturing footprint for the future. In that terms, we are going to see a mix of offshoring, reshoring, nearshoring, and friendshoring. And being closer to the customers, it has gained new priorities, so this could trigger maybe new FDI projects in both directions, I mean the EU and China. And last but not least, hopefully there will be industries that lead the economic cooperation and improve the statistics, and the electric vehicles and renewables are in a good position to be potential candidates for that. So that was from my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Peter, thank you very much for your great and clear presentation. I especially appreciated your efforts for the clarification of the real situation, despite the big political noise. So it's time to jump on our third speaker. She is Dr. Ching-Yi who is a senior researcher at the Institute for World Economics and Politics at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks the moderator and thanks the organizers invitation. And it's my honor. I'm very glad to join this meeting. My presentation mainly focuses on global supply chain disruptions and China-EU cooperation. My presentation includes the three parts. For the first part, I want to say something about the sources of global supply chain disruptions. I think it's important to differentiate the risk and the security of global supply chain. And in the second part, I want to say some about the impact of the global supply chain disruptions, mainly on the short-term and long-run effects. And finally, I want to give my suggestions on China-EU economic cooperation on global supply chains. The first is to establish an inclusive supply chain policy coordination mechanism. And the second is the launch of joint initiatives on export restrictions. And finally is strengthen bilateral supply chain cooperation. For the first part, we know that the global supply chain disruption is a new normal. We know that the advantage of global supply chain is to improve production efficiency and reduce production costs. And the premise of this existence is a free flow of goods, capital, and people. So the feature of the golden era of global supply chain from 1980s to 2008 is that there's no systematic disruptions. That means the flow is very good. The flow of goods, capital is very good. But now we know that it has been changed. There are two kinds of disruptions. The first is the production and the transportation are often interrupted. And the other is export restrictions are increasingly frequent. We know that not is export controls or sanctions. We know that many events will impact the supply chain, but the impact degree varies. This figure shows us that from the 1990s, there are so many world uncertainty event, but before the 2008 financial crisis, although there are some uncertainty events, but the impact on supply chain is not so large. But since 2008 financial crisis, we know that there are so many large events has so large shock on global supply chains, such as the coronavirus, the China-US trade war, and the Ukraine crisis. And so I think it's necessary to have two kinds of disruptions. The first is global supply chain risk. The risk is an economic issue. It means that the interruption of production or transportation, many factors can lead to this risk. The first is the market, such as the financial crisis, and the second is epidemic, such as COVID-19, made the trade decline so large. And the third is a war. We know that the Ukraine crisis has impact on agriculture production and grain transportation. And we know that the enterprises has noted the risks for a long time. They have always paid attention to manage supply chain risk. So there are methods to control supply chain risk for enterprises. And the harm, we know that the harm of supply chain risk depends on the extent and duration of the interruption. Eliminating supply chain risk is to avoid production interruption as much as possible. That means the robustness. And the second is enable the supply chain to recover quickly after the shock. That means the resilience. And for the security, I think it's a political economy issue. We should consider the political factors because the security of supply chain means export restriction or control by government. It's a government action. For example, the first is the US sanctions against China's semiconductor industry, and the second is Russia's restrictions on European energy. Actually, economists have long noticed the security problems arising from the interruption of imports. For example, for the energy, for the food security, and there are so many cases of embargo history. And for the reasons, security is mainly caused by political tensions among major powers. It depends on the impact depends on the controlled products and targeted countries. The importance of the products and the importance of the targeted countries. So I think it can only be solved by easing the political tensions of major powers. The figure shows us that the geopolitical risk index, and we can see from this figure that since 900, in these 2 years, the geopolitical tensions between the major powers are rising in recent 2 years. And just as the last speaker said, Mr. Peter said, that the geopolitical tensions. And the second, I want to see some about the impact. In the short term, I think the disruptions can affect global trade and world economy. The WTO just released its forecast on this year's and next year's the growth rate of world trade. Although this year's growth rate is 3.5%, is much better than last forecast. But in the next year, the growth rate of world trade is only 1%, sharply down from the previous estimate. We can see from this figure that the monthly growth rate of world trade since 2001, we can see before the financial crisis, the average growth rate of world trade is much higher than the average growth rate of after the crisis. And the volatility in these 10 years is much larger than before the crisis. So the interruption of global supply chains has largely impact on the world trade growth. And so the world economy, the whole world economy will be affected by the supply chain disruptions. Because it will affect the production of countries, because the countries cannot have their intermediaries from other countries. So the production will be affected. The World Economic Outlook released by the IMF just released the forecast. Its forecast shows that the next year's growth rate of world economy is only 2%, 2.7%. This is the weakest growth profile since 2001, of course, except the financial crisis and the 2020 pandemic year. And we can see from this figure to show that the disruptions will affect the production of our economies. The right figure shows that the giant force exposure to supply chains, that is China, US, Germany, and Japan, all the four economies rely largely on the intermediaries from foreign countries or from domestic. So we can see from this figure that the four giants exposure is very large. So if their intermediaries are interrupted, the four economy will be impact a lot. So because of the right figure shows that the giant force share of world manufacturing is so large. The total share of the four economies are more than 50%. So the other countries or the other economies all will be disrupted and affected their production. And in the long run, so the globalization and the economic development will be affected. For the globalization, we know that the economic foundation of globalization has become unstable. So I think it's hard for the golden age of globalization to be reproduced in the future. And besides, the obstruction of economic globalization will endanger world peace. Because we can know that the study from Professor Lu Changyuan shows us that the dependence of different countries on supply chains can maybe have the close political relations. And the second is that whether for developed or developing countries, the economic growth will stagnate for a long time, causing various social problems. This figure shows us that the primary commodity prices, we can see that the prices of primary commodity, for instance, energy, food, and natural gas, they increased sharply. This is mainly, and mainly factor is that we know that the disruption of the exports. So this will affect the lives of masses. Finally, I want to give my suggestion on China-EU cooperation on global supply chains. First, for the global supply chain risk, we know that it's an economic factor, economic issue. I think China and EU can establish an inclusive supply chain policy coordination mechanism because the risk has negative externalities and its stability needs the cooperation of all economies along the supply chain. So the policy coordination for maintaining the stability of supply chain should be inclusive rather than exclusive. Because the supply chain is typical of both prosperity and loss, exclusive supply chain cooperation mechanism, especially excluding China, does not work. It will not make the supply chain stable, but makes it unstable. So China and EU first should play the role of supply chain stabilizer in their respective regions, that is in East Asia and in Europe. And also for the bilateral level, China and EU can also establish a bilateral dialogue and cooperation mechanism to maintain the stability of supply chain. And in the multilateral level, China and EU can help and can cooperate to establish a multilateral mechanism to withstand supply chain risks. Second is that China and EU can launch joint initiatives on export restrictions. This is to deal with the security of supply chain. And first, I want to say that for the United States, there's no supply chain security problem in the United States. Although the United States leaders say they have supply chain security issues, I don't think the US has supply chain security problem. It just has risk issues. But for other economies, they more or less have supply chain security problem because no country has the ability to impose export controls on the United States, because the United States has the largest powers in the global supply chains. No country can impose export controls on United States. And the export restriction is the main reason for the security of supply chain. And so the rules, I think the rules for export restriction should be established. That means export restrictions cannot disrupt the supply chain. So we should be aware of the political nature of supply chain security. Major powers should take responsibility and emphasize cooperation or benign competition or healthy competition. We should not ignore the economists' beliefs that trade brings win-win results. This table is from two economists in American economists. They give us the aggregate gains from US-China trade. So although United States aggregate gains or welfare is not so large with China, but the US with China's trade has much contribution to US welfare from trade. So both countries can have welfare from trade. And finally is the strengthened bilateral supply chain cooperation between China and EU. China and EU are still highly complementary, I think. There's no fundamental conflict of interest between China and EU. First is that competition, or especially vicious competition or confrontation, should not be the theme of the time. So I think supply chain cooperation will benefit both China and EU. And for the cooperation industries, I think there are so many industries from low-end to high-end industries. And for the service trade, I think the digital economy is also a key area of China-EU cooperation. When the global production potential of commodities is difficult to release, I think the service trade is the growth point in the future. And China also attaches great importance to protecting citizens' privacy. This is much similar with EU. So China-EU cooperation in the digital economy, I think, has large potential. Finally, I want to say that in 2006, about 15 years ago, we know the chairman of the US Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, he just is one of the winners of the Nobel Prize in economics. He comes to Chinese Academy of Social Sciences to make a speech. I was a master student in 2006, and I listened to his speech. His name is Chinese Economy, Progress and Challenges. I think in the end, what he said is much important. That is, with greater integration comes great interdependence and greater responsibility. I hope that our countries will work together in the spirit of cooperation to address these shared challenges. I think for China, EU, US, and other economies, the global supply chains is a very important cooperation area. Thank you very much. That's my speech. Thank you.
Dr. Su, thank you very much for your clear overview and also the analysis of the global supply chain disruptions. I also appreciated your recommendations at the end. So these are very practical and badly needed. Last but not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Paula Thomas. She is a research assistant at the International Relations Jan Bratianu Institute of Romanian Academy. So please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. 大家下午好. Can you hear me, right?
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to this seminar. I believe it is a great opportunity for me to learn new things and to exchange opinions on the latest topic I have been conducting research on for the last 2 years. Cooperation between China and CEE countries, 中国中东国家合作, which started to be an important component of China-EU relations from 2011. As is well known, the format initially reunited 16 European countries, 11 EU members and 5 non-EU members, which is why the West called the cooperation platform 16+1 format. The foundation of the China-CEE cooperation was laid in the midst of the economic crisis, a crisis that had a major impact on Europe and exposed several weaknesses of the CEE countries. So at that time, China was seen in Europe as a stabilizing force. Therefore, the economic and financial crisis has caused the CEE countries to become highly aware of, first of all, the strong dependence on EU markets and capital. So we could say this is a common weaknesses of the CEE countries. Secondly, the shortcomings it presents compared to Western Europe, for example, poorly developed infrastructure. And thirdly, the transformation of China into an important global player. As Mr. Liu Zuokui, the vice president of China-CEE Institute, mentioned during a lecture this year, right from its inception, the format entered a golden period of development, in Chinese known as 黄金期. From 2012 and till 2017, the China-CEE cooperation improved continuously, and various cooperation platforms in the field of tourism, infrastructure, finance, agriculture, and think tanks have been created one after other. In the same time, the number of participants increased vividly. A series of large-scale infrastructure, energy, and other investment projects have been launched with the promotion of 10 billion special loans. It is worth mentioning projects such as Hungary-Serbia Railway, Montenegro North-South Expressway, Macedonia Expressway, Bosnia and Herzegovina Stanari Thermal Power Station. The reason of this successful project was the smooth economic development of China and the mainly stable context of an international level. It is noteworthy that the main factor that influenced the format's evolution was the European Union, which immediately after the meeting of political leaders in Warsaw in 2012, expressed its concern about China's initiative in the CEE region. While doubting China's intention in the CEE region, the EU did not issue a clear objection to this cooperation from the outset, but closely followed its evolution. In the early years of China-CEE cooperation, EU focused more on solving internal conflicts, as the outbreak of the economic crisis, the ongoing impact of the crisis in Ukraine, the refugee crisis, and the Brexit, which made possible for China-CEE cooperation to achieve multiple good results. But considering the format, a Trojan horse, it didn't take too long for EU to become suspicious of China's increased economic influence in CEE region. In 2019, EU-China relations were undergoing a dramatic change. If until recently, China was simply EU's strategic partner, starting with March 2019, in which China's strategic outlook presented China as a systemic rival. Among the 10 actions proposed by the European Commission and the High Representative for of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, the ones related to the security of 5G networks, a field where Huawei is an undisputed leader, and screening of foreign direct investment in critical assets, technologies, and infrastructure, definitely indicated an evident track of trust and a new way of looking at China. Due to the EU-China tensions and the frustration of the CEE countries, especially the 11 EU members towards China, caused by the unfulfilled promises, the CEE countries' skepticism has increased. The main frustration of the 11 EU member countries is the fact that they remain the region with the least Chinese economic presence in the world, measured, for instance, by shares of China in their exports or investment stock. They might be right, but taking into account the sanctions imposed by the EU as well as the US on China in the last years and the multiple changes that have taken place at the international level, it is very clear that it is not it was not easy period for China as well. In addition, leaving aside the influence of these factors, another issue I found is the perspective of the two parties. The CEE countries and China on the format is totally different. While many of the CEE countries were expecting quite results in terms of investing in as large a number as possible in their territory, increasing exports and reducing trade deficit with China, improving their infrastructure, China was more for the long-term view of this format. Amid tension with the EU and the US, the pandemic of COVID-19 has further set apart China and CEE. Under the mask of defense of own values, the Western world started to find ways to curb China's advances. The pandemic made many of the worldwide governments declare the over-reliance on China-based supply chains as a major threat and design new policies in order to reduce this overdependence. In 2021, tension arose in the China-Lithuania relation. The Baltic country not only decided to leave the format, but also to open a Taiwan representative office in Vilnius, making China to impose sanctions on it. Obviously, Lithuania's approach to Taiwan is a challenge to China, and certainly it's a risky decision. It is well known that Taiwan is a red line for China. Therefore, if a country wants to maintain good relations with China, must not cross it, but respect what is called 一个中国原则, One China principle. According to some researchers, the escalation of the conflict between China and Lithuania was just the tip of an iceberg of structural tensions between China and the CEE region. Then the war in Ukraine has led to a change in the foreign and security policies of the CEE countries, which will have in the future a great influence on the world political and security model, and also China-EU relations and China-CEE cooperation. Currently, for the CEE countries, Russia is the main threat, and China is perceived as a reliable political partner of it, which seriously damages China's credibility in the CEE countries. This situation makes the 16 countries, CEE countries, to choose partners to protect them from the Russian threat. The most reliable partner being NATO, which leads in the future to closer ties to US. Because of its stance on the war of Ukraine, China was not seen as a possible partner, as its refusal to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine has led to estrangement from the CEE countries towards China. According to a public opinion survey conducted in autumn 2020 in 12 European countries, it resulted that the perception of China correlates the most with the perception of Russia. The correlation is even stronger in the CEE region, where the historical memories of being under the control of communist Russia causes negative reminiscence of communist China. And this year, on August 11th, just a few days after China intensified its military actions, activities around Taiwan, following US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan. Without specifying the reasons, Estonia and Latvia announced that they were withdrawing from China-CEE format. In the present, without the Baltic states, the format has got a new formula, 14+1. According to media, the skepticism of Baltic countries towards China is due to China's proximity to Russia and China's opposition to imposing sanctions on Russia. As a conclusion, China has invested a lot in this format. For example, in think tanks, in research centers of CEE countries, therefore has achieved a vast knowledge of the CEE region. China is aware of the current priorities of CEE countries and is patient. China knows how to adapt and to be pragmatic. It has demonstrated this primarily through the EU compatibility in terms of compliance with European tenders, compliance with EU standards, building the Peljasak bridge in Croatia with EU funding. And it is aware of the frustration of the CEE countries and their expectation. So it will certainly look for ways to remedy the existing problems. The visit of the Chinese delegation from this year proves China's desire for dialogue and reconciliation. So from my point of view, a lot of dialogue is needed because one thing is certain, China still depends on the European consumer market for its export and technology for its growth. And the EU still relies on the on China's still cheap imports to tame the current inflationary spiral and its international dynamism and the potential for its large export sector. Of course, China has a lot to offer, and given the role it now plays globally, it can no longer be ignored. Despite all the arguments brought by EU or US, the CEE countries clearly should not give up economic cooperation with China without violating the community legislation. The CEE countries who still believe in the opportunities for cooperation must identify sectors where cooperation can be done. Many projects with the Chinese side can be obtained through local cooperation. So the Chinese side should carefully continue to analyze the local, regional, and national context. I can give you an example. In 2021, influenced by the EU's policy towards China, Romania banned Chinese companies that do not have agreements with the EU from participating in public tenders in Romania. But through local cooperation, the official implementation of the Zalău bypass ring road project, the first design and construction project that the Chinese funded the engineering contracting company, was officially possible in Romania. So this is all for me. Thank you very much. 谢谢大家.
Thank you very much, Dr. Toman, bringing the Central Eastern European issue or the perspective into the discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we are very much out of time. So I think there will be no time for the Q&A session this time, and it would be wise to jump on the closing session. So once again, I would like to thank very much for our great speakers for the contribution. It's very much, it was really a great opportunity to be the moderator of this panel this time. And again, thank you all of you. And nothing remains than to jump on the closing session. And I would like to give the floor to our Deputy Director, Dr. Tamás Baranyi, to close today's event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. And thank you very much for being the moderator of this whole event and tirelessly keeping this wonderful conference together throughout the whole afternoon or in China in the evening. Thank you very much for the China-CEE Institute and all who took part in the organization and obviously the contributions. I don't intend to keep you up very much longer. I would just highlight, some of the findings that came quite obviously through me. Professor Fong at the beginning and the contribution of Director Schober was I think, in a very interesting contrast because Mr. Fong emphasized the radically changed situation with regards to China in Europe that is like more heavily politicized than ever before, while Director Schober, on the other hand, stressed the importance of pragmatic relations vis-a-vis China. Obviously, one of them was like more descriptive, and the other one was more like pointing to what we should do in this respect. Interestingly enough, when we are talking about the contributors afterwards, I think our Chinese colleagues were very pragmatic in their outlook, and they pointed out that the reconfiguration of supply chains are actually bringing along opportunities to work together and to make the value chains local, more localized. Is also an opportunity for economic growth and also political cooperation. In this view, political cooperation grows out from economic necessities, which seems very much true, and I appreciate this viewpoint very much. On the other hand, our European colleagues emphasized the difficulties in this respect, how difficult it is to work together in an atmosphere which brings along like more and more tensions in the international system. I think both are correct, and this is why it is essential that we maintain such dialogues as we just had today. So we have seemingly, on the one hand, a strong commitment to working together with an obvious realization of the problems that are coming from tensions in the international system, while on the other hand, we have like very down-to-earth analysis of how working together on an economic field is not only beneficial from an economic point of view, but it has also beneficial spillover effects to the territory or the domain of politics as well. So for me, judging from all what has been said here today, the most important point is to keep up dialogue to begin with, and then to keep up and strengthen and amplify economic cooperation against even the odds of international tensions. I think this is a paramount interest of all the countries involved here. And the third is obviously that there are certain ways in which economic cooperation and political cooperation strengthen each other. And this should be our point. I think here in Central Eastern Europe, we are very well aware right now of the devastating nature of international tensions and of the devastating nature of war. And I think there is a point when all of our countries need to realize that international tensions need to be reduced because it is not good for our countries, not good for our populations, and obviously not good for our economies. This is what makes it even more urgent and important to actually continue talking with each other, and also in an academic way, but also in a political way. Just one last sentence about this academic dialogue that we just had today. It was not only one of the most high quality conversations that I was part of in recent months, but it also drew a great number of attention, which is a reassuring thing for me, because it shows that there is still a need for high-level academic exchange of ideas. And again, I think this is a very good basis of all the things that we just discussed. That is economic cooperation at first, and letting the beneficial spillover effects go to the domain of political fields as well. So that's why I'm very satisfied with this conference today, and I really hope you had the same feelings and same thoughts while listening and participating in it. I think I have no duties left right here, just to encourage us to keep up with this dialogue, and thank again for the organizers of this conference, Viktor Eszterhai, Doctor, specifically for the moderation, and also the China-CEE Institute and the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade, and everyone who took part in this conference. Thank you very much, and have a good day or a good evening.
Thank you, Deputy Director Baranyi. And last but not least, I would like to give the floor to Professor Chen Xin, one of my very old friends, who is the Deputy Director at the Institute of European Studies at CAS, and also the Executive President of the China-CEE Institute. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victor. I'm very glad to see all of these old friends, and I think today's conference, as Brian Tomasz has already expressed, is with a very high quality, and also we had a very intensive discussions and as well as some clarifications focusing on the supply chain issue. I think this is very important. We used to say European integration is a peace project, and we also say China's development is also a peace project. So that means China and Europe are in common. We pursue our developments for the prosperity, and we try to contribute for the mankind. At the same time, for the European Union, they have a new idea that from the peace project turn to the value project. I think as German Chancellor Scholz said several days ago, for China, I think we also have an ambition. That means to try to build a shared future for the well-being for the human beings. So I think this is also common. And in this sense, economy is the fundamental, and the supply chain is a core. And during the past 30 or 40 years, or for the European Union, for the 70 years, European Union had benefited from the integration. So the supply chain mainly based located in Europe, and nowadays in the globalization era, the supply chain has spread beyond Europe. So, and China is become part of the global supply chain. And China is also benefited a lot from such kind of integration. So this is a very good tendency, and for the both sides had benefited from this process. And traditionally, we used to talk about risks and for the security of the supply chain. But in the recent days, more and more factors had been involved, like the presenters and the speakers had mentioned about such as the geopolitical issue, the value issue, the energy crisis issue, and even the COVID, so the public health issue. In certain extent, in my opinion, if for the both sides, we're still working on the cooperation and pursue the development peacefully. It means we have the common ground, and we can avoid different noises and try to keep on the track on the development peacefully. So, as Polony Tomasz had said, European scholars used to discuss the issues, the problems, and the Chinese scholars used to or try to find opportunities and pursue the cooperations. I think for both sides, I agree with you that for both sides, it's generally common that we are interested in discussing this issue, and we try to find ways for the future. I think this is the main outcome for today's conference. So last word, I would like to thank all the participants for your excellent presentations. And also I would like to thank all the participants for your patience, listening, and in some extent discussing the very interesting and important issue. And also for your patience keeping yourself by the end of this conference. So by the end, I would like to thank our counterpart, the Hungarian Institute of International Relations and for Foreign Trade, for your strong support, as used to be. And also, I would like to thank our team in Budapest for their excellent work to organize and have the technical maintenance on this conference. So I would like to thank all of you and keep in touch. And we hope in the near future we can have our speakers on site and have the face-to-face discussions, not only on the conference, but as well as the cocktails and dinner parties. Thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good day.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.